banana meatball. Yeah. Turn it up. Nerdy by nature. Turn it up. Patterns in the air. Patterns every.
Daily life in ancient Egypt. Why was Egypt called the gift of the Nile? People have long been fascinated by ancient Egypt. Over 5,000 years ago, the Egyptians built an amazing civilization. We know a lot about the Egyptians' lives from tombs as well as written sources. A Greek historian, Herodotus, who visited Egypt around 2,500 years ago, called the Egyptian civilization the gift of the Nile. The Nile is the river that flows from south to north for 4,130 miles, 6,646 kilometers, dividing Egypt in two. The Nile's waters overflowed its banks once a year. It laid down a layer of new soil that made the land around it extremely fertile. A variety of crops grew in that narrow strip of land bordering the river. This map shows ancient Egypt with some major cities marked. Many of Egypt's amazing constructions can still be seen today. Much of Egypt is dry desert. No one could live in this wasteland. However, in the land next to the Nile, the great cities of Memphis and Thebes grew and flourished. The Nile provided more than drinking water and food. Egyptians also bathed and washed their clothes in its waters. They used the mud on its banks to build their houses, and the river provided a means of transporting goods and people. This included huge block stones used to build temples and pyramids. How do we know? Herodotus. Much of what we know about ancient Egypt comes from a book written by Herodotus, the Histories. In it, among other things, he described the Nile's annual flooding. The country is converted into a sea, he said. The towns which alone remain above water look like islands. What were Egyptian homes like? In ancient Egypt, people's homes were very different depending on how rich or poor they were. A small number of people were very wealthy. Richest of all was the king, called the pharaoh. He lived in several palaces around the country and had hundreds of servants. A few thousand nobles were also rich and had large houses and many servants. Most of their homes had bathrooms and toilets. Modern-style plumbing did not exist, however. Instead, a person sat on a wooden or polished stone toilet seat. A pottery container rested below it. A servant emptied the pot outside. Dates and palms and other plants thrived in one of several inner courtyards in a pharaoh's palace. Palaces like this were Egypt's biggest homes. But home life was very different for most other Egyptians. The houses of farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, and laborers were very small. The poorest homes had only one room, so the family had to sleep, eat, and do almost everything else there. People also kept their goats in their bedroom to keep them safe. The goats' body heat also helped keep the room warmer on chilly nights. Poorer homes had no bathroom or toilet. Building materials and rooms. The houses of both rich and poor had something in common. They were built from the same material. Most common were mud bricks. People pressed the mud into wooden molds and left them out in the sun to dry. Builders also used bundled river reeds, wood, and plaster. These materials were easily damaged by rain and wind, so all Egyptian houses needed frequent repairs. Country villas. Many wealthy Egyptians had large, comfortable country houses. They were often surrounded by vegetable and flower gardens, fruit trees, and stables for the donkeys and other animals. A noble's country home lies among large, well-kept gardens. The man is using a simple water-lifting device called a shaduf. Servants and slaves. Some Egyptian households could afford to hire servants. There were two different types of servants. One type was a free person, paid as a laborer. The Egyptians called the other type a Hemu. The Hemu were not as free as other servants. A hem could be bought and sold, for example. Hemu also earned less than normal servants did. Only a few of the workers on big building projects like this were Hemu. Many were farmers who were ordered to work on the building sites for a set period of time. The Hemu are often described as slaves, but they had certain rights that made them different in most other ancient societies from slaves who had no rights. A Hem not only earned small wages, he or she could also own land and other kinds of property. Hemu could also marry anyone they wanted, even non-slaves. A person became a Hem in various ways. Some Hemu were captured during war. Others were criminals who lost their rights as punishment. Others were born Hemu because their parents were. Whether free or a Hem, a servant performed unskilled tasks. Some servants were maids while others ran errands. Servants also cooked, served food, did laundry, and helped tend to the family's animals and gardens. How do we know? Household gardens. Many Egyptians, often even the poorer ones, had household gardens. Some grew vegetables, others grew fruit, trees, or flowers. The gardens might consist of a small open space between houses. It was also common to grow plants in clay pots. We know about these gardens because artists depicted them in wall paintings. Food and drink. The preparation and eating of food were two of the most important parts of the home life in Egypt. Thanks to the fertile soil bordering the Nile, the Egyptians grew enormous amounts of it, and people enjoyed a wide variety of fruits and vegetables and foods made from grain. In this ancient wall painting, the man on the right prepares bread dough in a large mixing bowl. The man on the left checks the loaves as they were baking. The most common of those grains was wheat. It produced the country's staple food, bread or te. Some of the vegetables they ate are still popular today. These include beans, cucumbers, lettuce, and onions. In the country's earliest times, figs, dates, and grapes were the most common fruits. In later time, peaches became popular too. The Egyptians also ate various kinds of meat. It came from animals such as cattle, sheep, goat, and several kinds of birds and fish. Herodotus told how some kinds of fish they eat raw. Often they were either dried or in the sun or salted. The Egyptians ate raw duck too, he said, but other sorts of birds and fish they either roast or boil. Bread ovens. How do we know? Experts know the Egyptians baked their bread. This is because several bread ovens have been found in ancient houses. The most common type of oven was a circular pottery shell about 3 feet, 1 meter high. The baker lit a fire on the inside and stuck thin pieces of dough to the oven's outer surface. Common drinks. Egyptian farmers drank a lot of milk from cattle and goats. People who lived in the city more often drank beer called henket. This was made from various grains and frequently sweetened with date juice or spices.